On a dark and starry night, friends sat around a campfire. They were in the middle of the forest, far from civilization, celebrating the birthday of one of their friend's sisters. Due to an unidentified disease, the doctor cannot diagnose the sister is often forced to stay outdoors. At least that's the explanation that Eric gave his friends. The friends gathered around the fire and played every game they could think of, like Never Have I Ever, Truth or Dare, Fire in the Barn, and so many others. In the middle of the fun, Thomas, one of the friends, suggested telling ghost stories to liven up the night. I think we should tell ghost stories. Honestly, I think telling ghost stories is just childish. Are you sure we're not too old for that? What do you think, Eric? I think it might be fun, but everything depends on what story is told. I have the perfect ghost story. It takes place in a haunted country house. That's boring. I agree, it's predictable. I have a story about a supernatural creature you probably never heard of before. And this supernatural creature is one of the most dreaded but beautiful supernatural creatures in history. Brother, I don't think that's a good idea. Enough, sister! The story has to be told, and I think the others are interested, right? All the others started to nod frantically in fear. See, Elise? They want to hear the story. Now, let me tell you a story that took place over 2,000 years ago. Are you ready for one of the most hauntingly beautiful stories, full of revenge, injustice, beauty, and bloodshed? Once upon a time, once of the most beautiful woman graced the heavens. Her name was Lily, and many men looked at her with lust, while women looked at her with malice and envy for her beauty. She was the most beloved daughter of two of the most strongest archangels. One evening, when she went for a walk next to the lake, one of her companions, Nereides, approached her and sought her affection. Hello, Lily. Hello, Angel of the Seas. You must not be so formal as to use my title. You can say my first name. I think that's inappropriate. You were a little teased by wearing these clothes to draw men's attention to yourself. I don't know what you mean. You know exactly what I mean, harlot. Now be a good little girl and don't say a word when I have my fun. The Angel of the Seas used his water magic to bind her so he couldn't take advantage of her. The Angel of the Seas terrified her when she realized what was happening. Lily quickly screamed, "Please don't do this! I don't want this!" Neterius said in a frightening tone, "Be quiet!" Time seemed to slow down as she turned towards the moon. As a celestial angel, she drew her power from celestial events, so she used the full power of the moon to turn it against Neteres. But because her emotions were running so crazy, she could not control her powers, and she killed him. And as a result, the heavens themselves trembled in outrage at the committed crime. She was quickly teleported to the council chamber. When she was delivered to the council chamber, all the archangels were present to pass judgment to what just occurred to Lily. Jove and Nyx, her parents, and the head of the archangels stood in the middle to pass judgment. Her father demanded to know what had occurred, his voice shaking the heavens themselves. "You have committed the gravest of sins, my child. What is your excuse for this?" He came on to me. "I was just trying to defend myself." "You may have been defending yourself, but have also committed the gravest sins by killing him." "Did I not have the right to defend myself? He was coming on to me without my permission. I was just defending myself, so I turned to the moon for solace and strength. But in turn, my magic reacted to the emotions I was feeling." "But you call that the gravest of sins, to kill someone? But should it not be as grave as someone taking advantage of someone in a vulnerable situation? In a certain way, the death can almost be justified. At the very least, should I not be shown mercy under these circumstances?" "I see your point, but under Archangel law, you are still held accountable regardless of your lineage or justification. Excuse me? Do not speak back, daughter. You are on thin ice. It is heresy, as others is no evidence. So you have two options. You can either end your own life or be forced to take away your wings in an angelic name and become an actual Nephilim, as well as allow your powers to morph as the vermin such as Fae, vampire, witches, and the others, and let your lineage succumb to the same fate. What is your decision, daughter? She could not help but begin to cry. Lily was perplexed. Being a fallen creature such as a witch, a fairy, or a vampire, or other Nephilim was considered the worst burden in the archangel hierarchy. She would become one step above the shifters, but just below them would be the demons. But she also knew she didn't want to die. If she allowed herself to succumb to the guilt her parents put on her, when she was in fact the victim herself, it went without saying. I shall take the curse. Very well then, I shall make the arrangements for your transfer to Earth. Enjoy your fall. And right away she fell to Earth for 2 days and 2 nights. After arriving on Earth, she traveled through the desert for several days, which was difficult as she was now mortal. She found her body was more sustainable than one of a human, but weaker than her angel body. She was so relieved when she found a town. When entering the town, her priority was to find water, as she did not think she could last much longer without any. When looking for water, she accidentally bumped into a person, but when touching him, it was like she was drawn into his head, and she immediately saw rats in his mind. When she let go, she began to scream. What was that? Stay away from me, you freak! When she looked down at her hands, horrified at what had happened, she ran away and bumped into more humans, and when touching them, she was forced to enter more people's head. And she realized she was seeing people's fears. She was forced to see snakes, rats, claustrophobia, and so many others that she could barely comprehend. She had to face them all until she entered the forest and found a cave. In the cave, she began to break down when she realized she had to feed on the fears of humans each time she touched them. This was her curse. It made sense in a way. Her fears came true when the heavens rejected her, and now she and her descendants are cursed to feel the fears of others for the rest of eternity. She stayed in the cave for 3 days and 3 nights, slowly becoming weaker, and realized she had to feed on fear soon or she would die. Nothing happened? Not you again! You know what? I can't handle this. I need a drink. When she got to the bar, she drank so much she did not even realize it was night. When night came around, all eyes turned towards her, and a boy approached her. Hello, can I buy you a drink? Are you attracted to me? Do I not disgust you? Disgust me? You are the most beautiful girl. With your brown eyes and your brown hair? She was so confused by the description because she was clearly blonde. Now she was clearly a brunette. He continued to talk, but she ignored him as she realized what caused him to see such drastic change in her appearance. It was her ability starting to morph, as she was warned about when she was expelled from heaven. She realized she could lure her victims as she saw an illusion of idolized women, as this would allow her to feed more efficiently, almost like a succubus, but in her case with fear, and she can only draw her abilities at night. When she realized this, she quickly became discouraged, stepped out of the bar, and returned to the cave. Over the years, she continued to live in the woods. She avoided people as much as possible, only going out when necessary. Over the next several years, she built a life for herself. She built herself a little cabin, and she even managed to make a friend with a boy in town named William. And over time, they became very close, but she kept her distance, even then, as she feared that she would hurt him. One day, she and William went hiking, But she was still scared on this hiking trip because she had learned to control her abilities over the years. But when she was around William, her emotions seemed to intensify and she felt she could not prevent them. Even now, she can't control her abilities to sense fear when her feelings are high. When they were hiking, she accidentally dropped her water bottle. So when they both reached for it, she immediately entered his mind. But when she entered his mind, as her fears were so intensified, she could not control herself. So she immediately was forced to see the routes of all his fears, and she could not help herself but see his greatest fear of them all. But she was confused when she saw his deepest fear. It was her dying. His greatest fear was her dying? But then she also realized he never saw a fake vision of her or an idealized version of her. It was the real her. He never saw an illusion that meant his ideal woman is the real her. And his biggest fear was her dying. She was so confused. Your greatest fear is losing me? How did you know that? She realized she loved him and no longer wanted to lie to him about what she really was. I want to tell you a story that will probably blow your mind. It's about my past. After all these years, you're finally going to tell me about your past? Yes, but please, I beg of you, don't think of me any differently, because if I lose you, I don't think I could survive that. No matter what you tell me, you will never lose me. Here goes nothing. Lily was worried he would reject her after telling the story, but William had a tear run down his face and said simply, I love you. I am so sorry you had to go through all this, but I need you to know that I will always be by your side because I love you. If you wanted to be my way, I would be the happiest person in the world. But my powers will still require me to feed on other people. That is fine. I will help you find people to feed. Consider me your guardian. Thank you. I love you so much. Over the years, they continued to live in the forest, but they built other houses in order to host other creatures like them after they had children. The children learned that only the girls were inflicted with the curse of having to feed on fear. On the other hand, the boys never inherited the curse. In fact, the boys seemed to only benefit as they were gifted with angelic beauty. But the boys with the beauty helped their community by luring victims into the community to feed the girls. This allowed for the girls in the community to not be exposed to broader society and bombarded with the fears of others, but still feed like their gifts require. Society may have isolated them, but there was a community. They were together, and they were very soon consisting of 1,000 people in their little town. Time, these creatures developed new abilities to adapt to their environment, such as taking away certain memories from their victims. This allowed them to make their victims forget the extraction process, so when the boys did bring their new victims to the community, they could just release them afterwards, without fear that the human world would learn what they are. Their abilities also developed in order to protect themselves. Anyone who dared harm them or touch them that they didn't want to, they could make them relive their fears over and over again until that person went crazy. And the most powerful of their kind developed the ability to feed on multiple people's fear without even having to touch them. Over the centuries, the Lily bloodline began to go out into the world. As a result, the news of a new supernatural creature spread quickly, and their history of it and abilities swiftly spread through the supernatural community. Now that these new creatures were known by the supernatural community, they were beginning to be called many things, such as Les Cauchemars, bringers of doubt, but the most common name used for them was nightmares. For a time, nightmares were happy. They had a community. They no longer feared the gifts, but learned to embrace them. But their happiness was short-lived. The gods were not happy that the bloodline that was supposed to be cursed instead had become the most powerful in the supernatural community. So they began to send hunters for their once peaceful community to wreak havoc and to turn the supernatural community against them. The gods began to spread rumors about them, telling them that whoever killed them and ate the body parts would allow the consumer to overcome all their fears. But before the archangels ever turned on them, they were feared in the supernatural community as they were so powerful. So when the gods turned their wrath on them, it gave the supernatural community an excuse to hunt them down. Several hunted them to gain the archangel's favor, or because the rumors the archangels spread about them overcoming fears. All these creatures were all Nephilims. In the past, their ancestors were all fallen from heaven, and they were all Nephilim because of that. But because the gods demanded it, they turned against their own kind. Several hunters, after hunting them down, began to display their body parts as prizes, such as an animal or a mummy in a museum. The Koshmaz were hunted down to near extinction. The Koshmaz were forced to dissolve their community out of fear of others. So these creatures were forced to be isolated by society for unfair reasons, and these innocent creatures were once again ripped away from everything they knew and forced to be isolated. Again, because of unjust archangels. Their history that they spent centuries gathering lost and only fragments remain. Only fragments of their history are remembered because of the Guardians' chronicling of what occurred in the past. This is the only reason why their story is even known in history, because it was written by the chroniclers. If not, these creatures' history and everything that they were would have been forgotten. And now every Koshmad that is still living is forced to be forever alone and only knowing fragments of their history and their true ability because of those who stole everything from them. Well, that was an interesting story. I never said it was done. Then how does it end? This is up to my sister. I'm confused. Eric did not respond. He simply just looked at his phone like he was looking for the time. And then Elise began to transform into a beautiful, radiant creature, which seemed like the moon itself was reflecting off her. Thomas and Lucas were afraid, but they were so enthralled about her that they could not find the ability to run. Brother, I still don't want to do this. Think of everything the hunters took from us. Our entire community, our history. Our mother and father were killed by hunters for the simple reason that some billionaire werewolf wanted to display their bodies like some sort of art piece. Think of every injustice done to us. Feed your wrath. Let the monster begin to take over. Remember, you are the last direct descendant of Lily's bloodline. What is he talking about? Agreed. You guys are crazy. Elise began to think of everything that was taken from her, and she realized that her brother was right. Oh, not crazy, just determined. You see, my brother left out something in his little story, and that is our own personal family history. You see, if a nightmare experiences a lot of fear, it can actually feed her own abilities. And this is just so happened to me. You see, one night, hunters found me and my parents in a cabin, and I had to watch them when they died. But that moment, my powers awakened, and I ended up killing them myself. Later, my brother found me covered in blood, and we realized that moment I was a powerful nightmare. But nightmare's full ability will only come to the surface on my 16th birthday, which so happens to be today. Well, if the story is anything to go by, you can only feed when it's a celestial event and the sun is starting to come up. At least according to the records the Guardians kept. This was true in the past, but as I said, our abilities grow and develop over time. And I happen to be the most powerful my kind has ever seen. In fact, powers could one day outweigh an archangel. As my wings prove, I have acquired the power of the archangels, which have been dormant in all Lily's descendants for centuries. But why take my word for it when I can test my abilities on you? When she first entered their heads, she started to go through all their minor fears. They had the typical ones of snakes, heights, etc. But the more she fed, the more ravenous she became, and she could feel her powers growing, and she could feel the monster in her bloodline that she so feared begin to awaken. So she began to dig deeper for more fears, and discovered their largest fear in their psyche. And that was their secret would emerge. There was a secret that they were no better than Notarius. They also participated in sexual assault, but their victim didn't find justice. So she would be the justice for her. So she fed from them until they were so weak that they were forced to repeatedly live their fears until the end of days. Finally, the justice that the girl they hurt was finally found. Then she realized that she was forced to do.
as their hormone levels stabilize. But a small percentage of those who experience trauma.
But after she exited their minds, she began to break down because she realized she would be forced to feed on people's fears to ensure her own survival for the rest of her life. Without feeding, she would die, so she began to weep and even scream, not for the boys that she fed on. No, that was justice, but the fears of what she would become. I'm a monster, a seductress. No, you listen here. They did not deserve anything more than they received. They were despicable. You will learn to make people forget who you are in the future, but don't be ashamed of who you are. Do not consider your abilities a curse, as the Archmage intended. Reclaim your abilities and make them your gift. In the past, powerful women were required to apologize for their power and status. You will learn to control your abilities to the point where you can function in society. As your guardian, I will help you locate individuals to feed on who deserve it until you can control the abilities, and you will learn to control it. But in case you are not the monsters they are. Thank you, brother. So, is this the end of the story? Just up to you to decide. Create a narrative of your own, just as Lily did before you. You are a powerful Koshmod, if you might be the most powerful of our kind. Do not have to touch your victim on the first time you truly feed is unheard of. Elise, you have no need to apologize for your power. Embrace your monstrosity because you are the powerful Koshmod to exist in a long time. Maybe one day, with training, you will even be more powerful than Lily. One day, we will no longer be the sheep or the prey, but instead the hunter, and we will hunt down everyone who has ever hurt you and our kind. Now, the rest of it is up to you, beautiful nightmare. We have much revenge to look forward to. Elise no doubt feared what she was becoming, but she was also proud of thinking of what she was capable of and taking revenge for all those who could not in the past. She could not help but smile and look forward to a new victim as the fear fed her. It will bring her one step closer to taking down everyone who has wronged us in the supernatural community, all the way to the archangels themselves.